Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. This wonderful new series. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. There are so many fabulous recordings that I'll have an opportunity to tell you about. And this is one of the ones that I really have been anxious to do because it's just, well, it's one of the greatest recordings ever. It's this. It's E.J. Moeran's Symphony in G minor, Sinfonietta, and Overture for a Masque, featuring the London Philharmonic and the new Philharmonia orchestras under Sir Adrian Boult on Lyrita. Now, there's a little bit of history here that we need to go into. You may recall I did a little book review of this, pardon me, here it is. This wonderful book by Lewis Foreman called Recording British Music, a personal history of 50 years researching and recording neglected repertoire. And I told you when we started this series that I was going to be talking about a lot of neglected repertoire because some of the very greatest recordings ever made, artistically, technically, and in terms of their musical significance, were of neglected repertoire. A lot of it was British repertoire because there were some wonderful independent labels doing absolutely stunning work throughout the 1960s and 70s, or even going back into the 50s. And one of those was Lyrita. Lyrita was the brainchild of a very eccentric guy. I think his name was Richard Itter. His last name was Itter. His first name, I'm not sure, because I never pay attention to things like that, even though he's mentioned 500 times in that book. And he recorded British music by composers who were not getting any play. But they deserved to because they were very, very good composers. And as you know, British music generally woke up after Elgar, after a century sort of in the doldrums where, the greatest British composer, was Sir Arthur Sullivan. Not that that was a bad thing because he was a fabulous composer and a flaming genius and probably still is the greatest British composer ever. Of course, whenever I say that, people jump up and down and get hysterical, which is why I say it. Anyway, the bottom line is there were dozens of really first class, or at least, deserving British composers, but they wrote in a conservative tonal idiom by and large. They were shat upon by the industrial avant-garde, particularly the post-war avant-garde that took over, like the BBC and all of those organizations, and orchestras more generally, and so they didn't get any play. One of them was Ernest John Moeran, who lived from 1894 to 1950. He was only 56 when he passed away. He was a raging alcoholic, which was a big problem. It really was. And because he was a raging alcoholic, he eventually, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. They thought he drowned, but, he had a cerebral hemorrhage and was dead before he hit the water. He was walking around somewhere on the moors, doing, those things that English composers of the pastoral school did. And he passed away. He did not write a great deal of orchestral music. He didn't write a great deal of music generally. He wrote this one symphony in G minor, the Sinfonietta, a serenade, 3 or so concertos that are quite lovely, a violin concerto that's terrific, and a cello concerto for his wife. His wife was Piers Coatmore, the cellist. And he was a gifted composer of the second level, you might say. He wasn't going to get any awards for originality. He was heavily influenced by the English pastoral school, that is folk music, Irish music, Scottish music, all that Celtic stuff, it was all in there. He spent a great deal of his time with Peter Warlock, the composer Peter Warlock, who was kind of nuts. And, they lived together in a cottage and participated in this unbelievably debauched frat type life where they were constantly drunk and screwing around, and it kind of ruined him, actually. I mean, Peter Warlock sort of got over it. E.J. Moeran didn't. He didn't have the strongest personality, it seems, and so he never quite got over it, and that's a shame. However, that's the history of the thing. This symphony in G minor is simply one of the great British symphonies from the interwar period. It's just marvelous. There are other great ones, Vaughan Williams 4 and 4, 5, 6, there's sort of wartime symphony things, and Walton's First. I mean, it's right up there with those symphonies. It's extremely heavily influenced by Sibelius, especially the finale, which, as I've said many times, sounds like tapiola played sideways. I mean, it really, really does a tapiola thing. And the very ending is his take on the curious ending of Sibelius's Fifth Symphony. It's really kind of fun because it's all cloaked in his own language. You know what the model is. It's like, the way people imitated Beethoven. It's like Brahms' First imitates Beethoven's Fifth. You know what the model is. It's very clear what the model is. But at the same time, there's more than enough originality and freshness of inspiration to make you simply enjoy the model as it only makes the piece familiar and easier to digest because you're aware of what the models are. But in any case, it's a tremendous piece. Exciting and thematically distinguished and beautifully written. And he was working on a second symphony at the time he died. It's been completed by others, as is always the case with these things. Lovely, absolutely lovely. But more to the point, Lyrita, the label on which this is recorded, was not only devoted to British music, but it was devoted to making recordings with first-class artists and first-class orchestras, giving them state-of-the-art sonics. And that is so, so important when you're talking about works that nobody knows. You want to make the best possible impression. You want to sell the product, as I've said time and time again. And I think it's wonderful that there are labels all over the place that are, that made recordings of tons of music with sort of second-tier orchestras and conductors we never heard of, and that gave us a taste of what the music was all about. But if you really, really, really want to be able to make the case for the music, you have to have the best. Absolutely, unquestionably the best. So with Adrian Boult, you had a conductor whose bona fides in the British school was second to none. His bona fides as an artist generally were second to none. He was a student of Arthur Nikisch, the great German conductor at the turn of the century. He had decades and decades of experience at the BBC Philharmonic. He was forced into retirement at age 65, and that's when his career began. And he started making tons and tons of records. He did all the Elgar symphonies, the Vaughan Williams symphonies. He did everything that he could get his hands on. And one of his very greatest records, as an artist, as a conductor, one of Boult's greatest records was this one, of Moeran's Symphony in G minor and the Sinfonietta, which was from 1944. The Symphony was from 1934 to 37, and the Overture is from also 1944. Really, really brilliant performances, well-disciplined, because Boult was not always a disciplinarian, beautifully played and stunningly recorded. Absolutely stunningly recorded. So this recording accomplishes everything one of the greatest recordings ever ought to do. It is great for itself. It's amazingly engineered, and it introduces you to some really important minor music, maybe minor composer, but important nonetheless for being, everybody has, most composers worth their salt, let's not say everybody, but most worth their salt have one or two masterpieces in them, and those masterpieces deserve to be known. And this is certainly one of them, and this is just an amazing recording of it. So there you have it, my friends. One of the greatest recordings ever. Keep on listening, my friends, and thank you so much for joining me. Give this a shot. You're going to love it. Take care.